Well, hello and welcome to today's Ask the Mayor show. This is going to be a two-part series. We have Paul Radford, who is the Deputy Director of the Georgia Municipal Association, with us to talk about various initiatives in the most recent legislative session of the Georgia General Assembly. So please stay tuned. Well, Paul, thank you for joining me this morning.
Well, I appreciate the invitation, Mayor.
Well, we appreciate you coming out. With me today, as I said in the opening, is Mr. Paul Radford. Paul is the Deputy Director of the Georgia Municipal Association. Paul, not everyone in our audience probably knows what the Georgia Municipal Association, or as we call it GMA, is and what they're about. I wonder if you could just take a few minutes and explain that.
Well, I appreciate that. The Georgia Municipal Association is a membership organization that represents 508 cities in the state, and we were created back, actually we'll be celebrating our 75th year of existence this summer. We were created, interestingly enough, over a tax issue back in 1934, and where cities got together saying that we can do more if we band together, and our number one mission is advocacy. And we do that both at the state level and at the federal level, but just as importantly, we provide a lot of services that help save taxpayers money, whether it be insurance for city employees, retirement programs, or just programs in dealing with industries that deal with cities and helping save taxpayers money.
Paul, you know, what's interesting is as much as things change, they seem to come right back to where we started 75 years ago. In this last General Assembly session, taxes and initiatives for new tax plans seem to be at the forefront of that last session. I know that, and I've heard you say this many times, that Georgia cities are important, very important to the state, especially to the state's economy. And I've heard you talk about the amount of revenue and what cities produce. I wonder if you could elaborate on that for our audience this morning.
Well, cities in general across the state, we have cities that are members of GMA ranging from population of 35 people up to the city of Atlanta, which is now approaching 600,000 people. Overall, the state's population, about 40% of the folks of the state's population live in cities, and that is growing and growing every day. There's a renewed love affair with cities, and cities provide a whole range of services that make living in cities very, very popular. In addition to just our population that lives in cities, cities are where commerce happens, is where tax dollars are generated, where wealth is generated, where jobs are generated. And you look at various data sets around the state, probably 70 to 75% of Georgia's commerce is generated within the cities of the state.
Well, and we here in Douglasville are almost a mirror image of what you just said. And if you look at the sales tax data in Douglas County, we collect over 70% of all the sales tax data, which basically equates to 70% of the commerce is done within the city. What I'd like to do this morning is talk with you briefly about the last legislative session that we had. It was very important to citizens throughout Georgia. I think, and this is just my personal opinion, it was as important what they didn't do to citizens who live here as it was the legislation that actually passed. And I know one of the things that GMA and you are very affectionate about and make sure that this is not diluted, and that's home rule. I wonder if you could take just a few minutes and explain to our audience your interpretation of what home rule is. Of course, It's in the Georgia Constitution. And then we'll talk a little bit about some attempts to erode or dilute home rule by the General Assembly this year.
That is a great point. I think it's just understanding how Georgia's system of local government is set up. County governments are arms of the state, created to carry out certain functions, such as the court system and the like. Cities are more organic in nature, but we were given the ability to be created by a charter from the General Assembly. And cities, not all cities are alike. They are reflections of the folks at home that they serve. And that provision of home rule basically says that notwithstanding any prohibition from state level, city councils and mayors and their citizens can put together programs and services that are unique to them and that serve them right. We are having issues the last several years where general pieces of legislation have been passed dealing with a unique local problem but having statewide application, unfortunately, that reduce your ability, your council's ability, to address the needs that your citizens have. Basically, they tie your hands. We battle that down at the Capitol every year, trying to educate members of the General Assembly about we understand there are going to be issues that are unique in areas around the state, but when you do it, try to fix it locally, not fix it in a global fashion that affects all 507 other cities that have not had that problem.
Right.
That's the issue that we battle every day. So home rule, or basically it's local decision making that goes along with local accountability. And we feel that city officials are the most accountable, and that's where the decision should be made.
And you're exactly right. All of the cities in Georgia, we're all unique. We're all different. But I believe that home rule is very important. And one of the things that I frequently talk to people about are the decisions that are made by city councils or even by county boards of commissioners. Now, a decision that's made at the state level or sometimes at the federal level may or may not affect you. Now, a lot of the things that were brought up this year would have affected almost everyone in Georgia, but the decisions that are made by local governments, you're almost guaranteed that they will affect you. And one of the examples I use is a zoning decision, because that zoning decision that's decided on a Monday night, our meetings are on Monday night, very easily could show up in your backyard Tuesday morning as the bulldozers come in to knock the trees down and things like that.
Correct.
So that's as close to home rule as I can describe it, is the decisions are made by a local government. And those people who make those decisions are voted in and out and are under some degree of control by the citizens who live here.
Well, the ballot box is the ultimate degree of local accountability, isn't it?
Well, you're exactly right. You know, one of the initiatives I know this year of GMA, and GMA has a very strong legislative, well, it's a group of mayors and a group of GMA people who basically act as lobbyists for Georgia cities, which in turn we act as lobbyists for all of the people who live in Georgia cities throughout the state. And it's a legislative policy council. I wonder if you could take a few minutes and talk about that legislative policy council and the arm of GMA. There are a number of staff people at GMA. Their full-time job is to look out for the benefit of the citizens who live in cities. And just tell our audience a little bit about those initiatives.
Well, our Legislative Policy Council is comprised of some 35 people, and it is basically our standing officers of our association. It is our committee chairs. We have 6 standing policy committees, which we've had the benefit of your leadership with our Municipal Government Committee for the last 2 years. And then we have folks from all around the state. GMA is divided up into 12 districts, just like the state has divided its service delivery mechanism up into 12 districts. That group meets 4 times throughout the year. They also meet during the legislative session every Monday morning in a conference call. And their job is to guide our legislative platform that starts immediately being developed for next year upon the conclusion of this session so that we're ready for the 2009 session now. And that group basically massages what it is that our membership has concerns about, and make sure our policies reflect that. It is a very, once again, an organic document that reflects the values of our association and the values of municipal officials who represent citizens that live in cities around the state. And that group guides our staff, and we have several registered lobbyists who are at the Capitol every day.
Right.
But they do so with the comfort that what they're advocating for is not their own personal opinion.
That's
it is
right.
the opinion of the majority of Georgia city residents around the state and majority of city officials. And so when they're up there having to make a decision on whether something is good or bad for the cities of the state, they can do so with confidence that our policies reflect that support mechanism.
And I can tell you from being involved with that group of elected officials and GMA staff people, they do an excellent job for those who live in Georgia, because not everyone can be down at the Capitol looking at every bill that comes up and analyzing every bill. And truly they are looking out for the benefit of the citizens who live in our cities.
Well, this particular year, we were following 401 separate bills that had a direct impact on cities. There was probably 1,500 to 2,000 total bills that had been introduced. Some of those, with some minor word changes, could have affected us, but 401 bills is what we were following, and our Legislative Policy Council was following, that could have done some good or done some harm to cities around the state.
Well, we talked a little bit earlier about home rule and what home rule was. Let's take just a few minutes and talk about just a few of those bills that were introduced this year that could have had a dramatic impact on Georgia citizens, and especially citizens who live in cities around the state. And probably none more important than the taxing bills that came up. Can you take just a few minutes and talk with our audience about some of those bills? One in particular was introduced that would have dramatically changed the way Georgia citizens are taxed.
I'd be glad to, and I think that really goes to the heart of that question you asked earlier about home rule and local decision making. It was a bill introduced that had called the Great Plan by the Speaker of the House, and we have fought that bill for a year now since it was first introduced. It's not a personal fight, it is a principle fight, and I think that is an important difference. When you talk about tax reform, we think it's important. Our association has advocated for tax reform for the last 7 years. We think it ought to be done in a comprehensive way. It ought to be done in an inclusive way. Everybody needs to be at the table, because our tax system is considered to be one of the fairest and one of the best in the country. And if we want to change the way we tax, then we need to do so in a very careful and measured way. Our concern was that the bills, as they started morphing and changing over the last year, they were going to have a dramatic impact on your ability as a mayor and your council's ability to deliver services and be accountable for those services. And we weren't alone in that fight. We were very vocal. We were very public in our opposition. But it was based upon a principle, and a fundamental principle of who gets to make the decisions. Should it be made downtown at the Gold Dome in Atlanta, or should it be made at City Hall in Douglasville or City Hall in Billerica? And we were joined in our opposition by county governments, by the School Boards Association, by the School Superintendents Association, by the Association of Retired AARP of Georgia, by the Georgia PTA, and the groups go on and on. And our fundamental reason for opposing the bills as they were written was of local accountability and local decision making. During this particular session, we've been fighting this ever since the last session. And this particular session, you saw several tax proposals float. There was one in the House that passed the House after some minor adjustments, well, I guess you'd call them major adjustments, that would have dealt with a provision of the car tag tax and dealing with a millage cap. The House version of the bill would have been the complete elimination of the car tag tax, which is fine. That's all local revenue. That's some $600 or $700 million. Our question is, how are you going to replace it? Are you going to ask us to have to raise property taxes? Are you going to give us other alternative revenue sources, or you're expecting us to cut services? Secondly, it would want to put an assessment cap. As properties are reassessed, you don't do that. Your council doesn't do
That's
that.
right. It's a Board of Assessors.
That's the Board of Assessors that's done so under state rules. Then you have to live with that, and you have to go through a process of rolling your property taxes back once you get your new assessments in. But we could live with the assessment caps if they're reasonably tied to a government inflation rate. But if you tie them to an arbitrary rate, we had some major opposition. And then the third part of that whole tax bill was something that we could not live with, which was a millage cap. When you put in place a millage cap, you are in effect restricting your ability to be responsive to your citizens forevermore. That bill, the millage cap was thrown out. It passed the House. The Senate had a bill, but it took a different approach. It took an income tax approach, which we felt was a much more reasonable way of going. If you want to do state tax reform, do it with state tax dollars. Don't use local tax dollars to do it. In the end, nothing passed on tax reform. It's an issue that will come back because we think that there's a lot of political motivation for it to come back. We're hopeful that if they decide to do tax reform in the future, that they heed the advice of many organizations, including those expert in the field of taxation, that you need to do so in a very inclusive, measured, and controlled way.
And I agree with that. I think if you took a survey of mayors and city council members around the state, you would probably find that all of us are in favor of some comprehensive tax revision. As you said, in a measured way. And to me, that means you take a period of time to study and you look at the ramifications of what you're suggesting and you look at all the alternatives that might be available. What we saw in this last session is on the 40th day, at the 11th hour, there was backroom deal cutting being done. That's not the way, in my opinion, to treat a taxing system in the state of Georgia, or at least in the cities, because it basically would have wielded an unmanageable system. One of the big problems with what was being proposed is that the citizens of Douglasville would have been paying their taxes, sending it to the Capitol, down to the Gold Dome, into Atlanta. Their governments here, when they needed to purchase a new police car, we would go to the Capitol with hat in hand and say, Mr. Legislator, will you please give us enough money to buy a new police car? That's not good government, in my opinion, and that's what we were faced with.
And that was our fundamental opposition to the bill, is that it was a basic disregard for local decision making and home rule. And it's a situation where in other states similar type programs have been tried, and the first funds, when the budgets are tight at the state level, the first funds that go away are those for local governments. Right now, if your revenues slow down, you and your council with your staff make the tough decisions on how you're going to weather the storm, how you're going to keep your level of service up, but keep taxes down. And the last thing that you want to do as a mayor, and the last thing your council wants to do, is have to raise their hand for voting for raising taxes. But if you have to do that, if you have to make those decisions when decisions are being made in Atlanta that affect you, it makes your job much tougher. It makes your degree of accountability less firm.
Sure, it does. And I can tell you, the voters in Douglasville, they hold their local elected officials accountable with respect to how the tax money is spent. At least this government, and I know there was a lot of criticism of local governments about taxation. But if you look at the track record of the city of Douglasville, and I can't speak for other cities, but our millage rate is lower now than it was, well, I've been in office 12 years, I guess, and it's lower today than it was then. And you can't be assured of that if you have a taxing system that's controlled by somebody in Atlanta. One of the problems that I saw with this great plan, I called it not so great plan, was what it would have done to the senior population
Exactly.
in our county. For example, if you're, I think it's 65 years old, I'm getting close, I'm thinking about this tax reduction.
Enlightened self-interest.
Exactly. You do not have to pay school tax in Douglas County. Now, had the great plan went through, it would not have been a tax elimination. It was a tax shift. So that senior population that would have a more difficult time coming up with additional tax money would have had to come up with additional tax money. They would have paid that property tax as a sales tax. So this was not a tax reduction for anyone. It was a tax increase for the senior population, because when they went to see their attorney, when they got their haircut, those kind of things, they would have been paying a sales tax on that they currently do not pay now. And they would have paid more money than they pay in real estate property tax now. So,
In which real estate property taxes are deductible on your federal income tax, whereas sales taxes are
it's
not.
not.
And you're right. I mean, that was one of the our major concerns. I think one of the reasons why the AARP of Georgia joined the battle. They joined it they wanted to make sure that local decision making remains local. They also had a concern with the whole shift of tax burden from. They paid taxes for years. Local systems already exempt them from property taxation after a certain age. And this would have done, just like you're suggesting, is that they would have had to pay for services, even nursing home care.
That's right.
And at one point in time, we were talking about medical expenses. I mean, it would have hurt young and old alike in terms of those trying to get into the home market, and those who were on the in the twilights of their life, and would have had to pay more taxes.
You know, Paul, one of the disturbing things about this tax plan that I was exposed to, and talking to members of the General Assembly this year, and talking to them about all the bad things that this tax plan would have done. I actually had one legislator tell me, "Oh, it won't matter. A year from now, nobody will know what we do." And that disturbs me a great deal when we're talking about citizens and paying their taxes. And I can tell you, if it's left up to home rule, all of our meetings are on TV. We're soon to do web streaming. I mean, it is easy, and most everyone in the city of Douglasville, they can almost tell you down to the item who voted on what. And this member of the General Assembly was exactly right. They can tax, and really folks don't know much about who voted for it or who voted against it. And so they, to me, felt somewhat insulated from the general population in imposing this new tax system.